You've never been on a real mission. That's what he said. Not as a question, as a fact, stated flat, in a room full of headsets and cold coffee, like he was reading it off a checklist. I didn't answer him. I just kept my eyes on the screen in front of me, because I learned a long time ago that silence says more than a comeback ever could. My name is Grace Bennett. For the last 3 years, I've been a contractor. A tactics instructor, technically, though most days it feels more like babysitting simulators for pilots half my age who think a joystick and a control stick are the same thing. I sit in the back of briefing rooms. I take notes nobody reads. I wear a polo shirt with a base logo on it instead of a flight suit, and I answer to ma'am from kids who have no idea what that word used to mean when it was said to me. Before we go further, if you're new here, subscribe now, drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from, and hit that like button. It costs nothing, and it means everything to a channel like this one. Okay, now let's get into it. The room I was sitting in that morning was Joint Operations Planning, Cell 3, a windowless box lit by monitors, 3 rows of desks, and 1 wall-size screen tracking a live mission feed. 6 pilots, for planners, and me, folded into a corner chair I'd learned to make myself small in. The mission on the board that day was routine. A pair of F-22 Raptors running an escort package. Nothing dramatic, nothing that should have needed my opinion. But Captain Kevin Doyle liked to ask my opinion anyway. Not because he wanted it, but because he liked watching me try to give it. Bennett. He said my name the way some men say a word they don't respect. You got thoughts on the ingress route? I did. I flagged it 20 minutes earlier. A ridge line that would put the lead aircraft in a radar notch for 11 seconds too long. 11 seconds doesn't sound like much until you've been the one flying through it. The route's fine, I said instead, because I'd said things like this before and watched them get waved off anyway. He smiled like he'd won something. You've never been on a real mission, Bennett. Maybe leave the routes to the people who have. Somebody near the front laughed, quiet, quick, gone. I didn't look up. I just felt my left hand find the old scar along my collarbone, the one I never explain, and press against it once, the way I always do when I need to remember I'm still in the room. Nobody in Cell 3 knew about the scar. Nobody knew about the 6 months in a hospital in Landstuhl, or the year after that I don't talk about, or the reason my left hand sometimes goes stiff in cold weather for no reason anyone around here has ever asked about. They knew Grace Bennett, contractor, badge number 4471, coffee black, no cream. They didn't know the other name, the one that used to come through a headset instead of off a name tag. I let the silence sit there a second too long, the way I always do, and then I looked back down at my screen because the ingress route wasn't actually the thing I was worried about. It was the weather cell building 30 miles west of the corridor, the one nobody in that room had flagged yet, the one that was going to matter a lot more than 11 seconds of radar exposure. I didn't say anything about it. Not yet. There's a version of me that would have. There's an older version, one that used to have the rank and the call sign to make people listen the first time. That version doesn't sit in the back row. The mission clock on the wall ticked to 0847. 2 Raptors, call signs Widow 1 and Widow 2, checked in on push, engines settling into that low, familiar hum you feel in your teeth before you ever hear it. Doyle leaned back in his chair, satisfied, like the hard part of his morning was already over. It wasn't. Not even close. The first sign of trouble came at 0912, 25 minutes into the package, and it didn't come from the weather. It came from Widow 2. Widow 2, Widow 1. Your trailing smoke confirms status. The transmission crackled through the cells, overhead speakers, and every head in the room came up at once. There was a pause. Too long a pause. Then, Widow 1, Widow 2, I've got a right engine fire light, RPM's unwinding, the voice cut off, came back thinner. I've got a second indication now. Hydraulic pressure is dropping on the right side. Doyle was already on his feet, headset half on, shouting for the duty officer. The room dissolved into the particular kind of controlled panic that happens when a routine Tuesday turns into something nobody trained for that specific morning. Voices stacked on top of voices. Someone was pulling up the divert field. Someone else was on the phone to command post. I didn't move. I watched the telemetry feed instead. Altitude, airspeed, that failing hydraulic pressure line dropping in a curve I recognized in my stomach before my brain caught up to it. Right engine. Right hydraulic system, storm cell 30 miles west and closing. I knew exactly what was about to happen to that jet, because it had already happened to me once. Nobody was asking my opinion this time. Nobody even remembered I was in the room. That was about to change. Widow 2, say fuel state, say souls on board. The duty officer's voice was climbing half an octave with every sentence. One soul's fuels. Fuel's fine, it's not fuel, it's the right side. I'm losing pressure on primary flight controls. I got a partial. Another pause, worse than the first. I've got a partial hydraulic failure, and I don't have a divert field with the right runway heading for these winds. I stood up. Nobody noticed for a second. Then Doyle turned, and for half a breath his face did something I'd never seen it do before. A flicker of why is the contractor standing up, followed almost immediately by irritation, like I was interrupting a fire with a suggestion about paperwork. Bennett, sit down, this isn't. There's a technique for a partial hide failure with a right side engine fire and gusting crosswinds, I said, and my voice came out flatter and steadier than I expected it to. It's not in the checklist you're looking at. It's not in any checklist. It only exists because 3 pilots figured it out the hard way, and I'm the only one still alive who was in the room when they wrote it down. The room went quiet in a way rooms don't usually go quiet for a contractor in a base logo polo shirt. How would you know that? Doyle said, and it wasn't really a question anymore. I reached for the comm headset on the empty console beside me instead of answering him. The headset was cold against my ear, the kind of cold that only lasts half a second before your own pulse warms it up. I keyed the mic before anyone in the room could stop me. Widow 2, this is cell 3. Hold your transmission. I need 30 seconds of your attention, and I need you to trust me. Who is this? The pilot shot back, voice tight, strained, the particular strain of someone flying a jet that's trying to kill them. I need ops, not whoever this is. You need someone who's done this before, I said. Widow 2, reduce power on the left engine to match asymmetric thrust. Don't fight the yaw. Let the jet tell you where it wants to go, and then correct it small. You're not going to muscle this airplane. You're going to listen to it. Doyle grabbed my arm. Bennett, stand down. This is not your. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the telemetry feed, on that hydraulic line, still bleeding out, on the storm cell, now close enough that the pilot was going to have to make a decision in the next 90 seconds whether anyone in this room liked it or not. Widow 2, I said again, steady, say your gauge readings. All of them. Right now. There was a long silence on the other end. Then, quieter than before, almost confused, copy, reducing left power. Who is this? Someone in the room whispered the question out loud before the pilot even finished asking it. The duty officer, a lieutenant colonel named Nathan Reed, stepped in close, his face a mixture of fury and something closer to desperation. Bennett, if you're wrong, that jet ditches with a pilot on board. Tell me right now why I should let you talk on this net. I didn't have a badge that outranked him. I didn't have a patch, a flight suit, or a single line on my contractor resume that would have meant anything to him in that moment. What I had was a scar under my collarbone and a memory I'd spent 3 years trying not to think about. Because I've flown this exact failure, I said. Not simulated. Flown. And I walked away from it. And 2 men I loved very much did not. And I've spent every day since then making sure nobody else has to find out the hard way what I know for free. Reed's jaw worked once, twice. Behind him, Doyle had gone very still, the mockery gone out of his face entirely, replaced by something he didn't seem to know what to do with. Let her talk, Reed said finally and stepped back. I keyed the mic again. Widow 2, you're doing this exactly right. I need you to bring your nose up 2 degrees, and I need you to tell me the second that fire light changes color. Not goes out. Changes. Copy, the pilot said, breathless. Standing by. The room held its breath with her. For the next 90 seconds, nobody in cell 3 spoke except me and a frightened voice 8,000 feet over a storm cell that was starting to chew at the edges of the flight path. Fire lights amber, Widow 2 said. It was red. Now it's amber. Good. That's the suppression system doing its job. That's not the engine getting better. Don't relax. I watched the hydraulic pressure line on the screen, still falling, but slower now, the curve bending instead of dropping. You're going to feel the jet want to roll right in about 10 seconds. Don't correct it with aileron. Use rudder, small inputs, let the wing do the work. How do you? She caught herself mid-sentence. The way people do when there isn't time left for the question they actually want to ask. Copy, rudder. Behind me, I heard someone pull up a personnel database, heard fingers on a keyboard, heard Reed's voice low and urgent. Find out who authorized a civilian contractor on a live tactical net. I didn't turn around. I didn't have time to turn around. The storm cell had eaten the western half of the divert field's approach corridor, and Widow 2 had maybe 4 minutes of usable hydraulic pressure left before the choice got made for her. Widow 2, I said, I need you to trust me on the next part. It's going to feel wrong. It's going to be right. There was a pause. Then, copy. I trust you. I don't even know your name. I almost smiled. Almost. You will, I said. Everyone in this room is about to. Behind me, the keyboard sounds had stopped. I heard Reed's voice again, quieter this time, edged with something that wasn't anger anymore. Bennett Grace, he read off the screen slowly, like the words didn't fit together the way he expected. Contractor status, 6-year gap in the civilian employment record. Prior service redacted. A pause. Redacted. On a base personnel file. That's not possible, Doyle said, but his voice had lost all its earlier certainty. Civilian records don't get redacted like that. Only classified service records get flagged that way. Reed finished for him. I kept my eyes forward, on the screen, on the jet, on the storm. Widow 2, status. Rudder's working, I've got the roll under control. Hydraulic pressure's holding steady, not climbing, but holding. Relief was creeping into her voice now, thin and disbelieving. I think I can make the runway. You can, I said. You are. Keep the nose exactly where it is. Behind me, I heard Reed pick up a phone, his voice dropping to something almost formal. I need a callback authorization on a redacted personnel file, priority, right now. A pause while he listened. Then his voice changed entirely. Say that call sign again. I already knew what they were about to hear. I've been waiting 3 years for someone to ask the right question. Nomad, Reed said out loud, to no one and everyone at once, staring at his own screen like it had just told him something impossible. The file says the call sign was Nomad. The room didn't go loud. It went the opposite of loud, that particular silence that happens when 40 people all understand something at the exact same second and none of them know what to do with their faces. Doyle looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time, which in a way he was. Nomad, he repeated, and something in the way he said it made it clear the name meant something to him that it hadn't meant 30 seconds earlier. That's Squadron. That's the incident from. Don't, I said, quiet, not unkind. Not right now. There's a jet in the air. I keyed the mic again before anyone could ask me the 12 questions stacking up behind their eyes. Widow 2, this is Nomad. You're 4 miles out. Gears are to feel heavy on that side. Don't fight it, let it settle. There was a long pause on the other end. Then, very quietly, Nomad. I've heard that call sign. My instructor at the schoolhouse, he used to talk about a pilot named Nomad like she was a ghost story. I get that a lot, I said, and for the first time all morning, my voice wasn't entirely steady. Gear down, Widow 2. Bring her home. The gear indicator on the telemetry feed flickered from red to green. 3 lights instead of the usual clean chime everyone in that room had heard 100 times and never once actually listened to. This time, everyone heard it. Gears down and locked, Widow 2 said, and her voice cracked on the last word, the sound of someone realizing they were allowed to be afraid now that the fear had somewhere to go. Nomad, I've got the runway. I've got the runway in sight. Good. I kept my voice flat, clinical, the way I'd trained myself to sound a lifetime ago, when flat was the only thing standing between a pilot and panic. Airspeed's going to want to bleed off faster than normal with that hydraulic loss. Carry 3 extra knots through the flare. Don't chase the numbers, feel the airplane. Behind me, I was aware of Reed on the phone again, his voice low and fast, feeding someone up the chain a name that hadn't been spoken out loud on this base in 3 years. I was aware of Doyle, standing very still, arms crossed, jaw tight, staring at the side of my face like he was trying to reconcile 2 different people who happened to be wearing the same body. I didn't look at him. There wasn't room in me for that yet. There was a jet 4,000 feet up with a pilot who trusted a stranger's voice more than her own instincts right now. And that trust was the only thing keeping her alive. Widow 2, I said. Talk to me. Every second. I want to hear your voice the whole way down. 3 miles, she said, breath coming in short, controlled bursts, the sound of someone flying a checklist with half her brain and holding on with the other half. Airspeed's 140, gears down, fire lights still amber. Copy amber. Leave it. If it goes red again, tell me immediately and nothing else. You eject. You don't wait for me to say it's okay. I said it evenly, the way you say the worst sentence of the whole exchange, because pretending it isn't on the table helps no one. But it's not going red. That fire's out. You're just watching an indicator do its job. Copy. A pause, then quieter, 2 miles. I could see the crash trucks staged on the runway. They're there because it's procedure, not because anyone thinks you need them. I glanced at the pressure line one more time. Steady, holding. The bleed finally stopped somewhere in the last 90 seconds without anyone in that room fully understanding when. You flew this. I just talked. Remember that part when this is over. Somewhere behind me, Reed had gone quiet, phone still at his ear, listening to whoever was on the other end of a call that was clearly no longer routine. Doyle hadn't moved. Nobody had moved. 40 people in a windowless room were holding their breath in unison for a woman none of them could see, guided down by a voice most of them hadn't listened to an hour earlier. 1 mile, Widow 2 said. No, Matt, thank you. Whoever you are, thank you. Fly the airplane, I said. Thank me on the ground. The last mile is always the longest one. I know that better than almost anyone alive, and I stood there in that cold room with my hand pressed flat against the console, watching a green dot crawl across the screen instead of feeling the actual controls in my own hands, and it was somehow worse this way. At least in the air, you're the one who gets to decide. 500 feet, she said. 400. I've got the numbers, I've got the runway, You're doing it exactly right, I said, before she could finish whatever sentence was about to turn into fear instead of focus. No's attitude looks good from here. Trust your airspeed, not your instinct. Your instinct is going to want more power than you need. Copy, 200 feet. The room had gone so silent, I could hear the individual hum of a dozen different monitors, the click of Reed finally setting the phone down, the sound of Doyle's breathing, shallow and quick, 3 feet to my left. 100 feet. 50. The transmission cut into a burst of noise, tires meeting concrete, the specific violent shriek of a hard landing that was still, somehow, a good landing, a landing that ended with an airplane rolling upright on a runway instead of scattered across a field. The telemetry feed showed the jet slowing, stopping, engines spooling down to idle in real time on a screen 40 people were staring at like it was the only thing in the world. Nomad, Widow 2 said, and her voice broke completely on my call sign. I'm down. I'm safe, the fire trucks are. I closed my eyes for exactly 1 second. Just one. Good landing, Widow 2, I said. Go see your family tonight. I set the headset down on the console with a hand that was for the first time in 15 minutes allowed to shake a little. Nobody in the room said anything. Nobody moved. The mission clock on the wall read 0931. 19 minutes. It had taken 19 minutes to feel like a decade. It was Reed who finally spoke, and his voice had lost every trace of the authority he'd walked in with an hour ago. Nomad, he said again, like he was still testing whether the word was real. You were part of the 71st. The classified rescue package out of, he stopped himself, glancing at the room full of people who didn't have the clearance for the rest of that sentence. I don't talk about the 71st, I said, and I meant it gently, not sharply, because none of this was Reed's fault or even really Doyle's. It was just what happens when you spend 3 years being small on purpose. Not here. Not today. Doyle uncrossed his arms slowly, like the motion cost him something. You said 2 men you loved didn't walk away, he said, quiet enough that it wasn't really a question, just him working through what he'd overheard 20 minutes earlier. From a failure you just talked her through. I nodded once. I didn't offer more than that. And to his credit, he didn't push. "You've never been on a real mission," he said instead. And the words came out different this time, stripped of every ounce of mockery they'd carried the first time he said them. "I was wrong. I need you to know I was wrong." "You weren't wrong to not know," I said. "You were wrong to assume that not knowing meant there was nothing to know." It wasn't forgiveness exactly. I wasn't in the business of handing that out for free, not after 3 years of polo shirts and folding chairs and being talked over in rooms I used to command. But it wasn't nothing either, and I could see that landed somewhere in him, a small crack in whatever certainty he'd built his whole personality around. The door at the back of cell 3 opened, and a full-bird colonel I didn't recognize stepped in, flanked by 2 officers moving with the particular urgency of people who'd just gotten off a very short, very intense phone call. His eyes swept the room and landed on me immediately, like he'd been given a description and I matched it exactly. "Which one of you is Bennett?" he said, though it wasn't really a question. Everyone in the room, without meaning to, looked at me at the same time. I stood up straighter than I had in 3 years. "That's me," I said. He crossed the room in 6 steps and stopped in front of me, and for a second nobody breathed, unsure whether whatever was coming next was going to be praise or an arrest. Then he raised his hand to his brow in a slow, deliberate salute, and behind him, one by one, the other officers in the room did the same. I hadn't been saluted in 3 years. My hand remembered what to do before my brain caught up. I returned the salute the way muscle memory always does, clean, unhurried, like no time had passed at all. Then I let my hand fall, because standing there holding it felt like claiming something I wasn't sure I still had a right to. "Colonel Marcus Whitfield," the officer said, dropping his hand. "I flew with the 71 SD Sister Squadron 8 years ago. I never met you. I heard about you." He paused, glancing once at the wall screen, where Widow 2's jet still sat parked and steaming on the runway feed, ground crew swarming like ants. "Everybody who was in theater that year heard about you." Doyle shifted his weight beside me, and I could feel him working through the math of everything he'd said to me over the past 3 years. Every leave the routes to the people who have, every eye roll when I flagged a weather cell nobody else had caught yet. I didn't look at him. This wasn't the moment to make him relive it out loud. "Ma'am," Whitfield said, and the word landed different this time, not the flattened, dismissive version I'd gotten used to, but the real one, the one that used to mean something to me before I stopped expecting to hear it. "I'd like to know why a decorated combat pilot has been sitting in the back of my planning cell in a contractor badge for 3 years. "Because nobody asked," I said simply, and I stopped offering. Whitfield didn't have an answer for that right away, and I didn't need him to. Some silences aren't awkward. Some of them are just true. Reed cleared his throat from behind his console, still holding the phone he'd used to confirm the redacted file, and gestured at the screen. "Widow 2 is requesting to speak with Nomad directly. She says it can wait, but she'd rather it didn't." I nodded and picked the headset back up, and the room, which had spent the last 20 minutes learning an entirely new version of who I was, went quiet again to listen. "Nomad, this is Widow 2. Her voice was steadier now, but there was something raw underneath it, the particular shake that comes after the danger's gone and the body finally lets itself feel what it just survived. "I don't know your real name. I don't know your rank. I just know I'm alive because of you, and I wanted to say that before anyone in that room debriefs me and makes it sound clinical." "Grace," I said. "My name's Grace Bennett." "Grace." She repeated it like she was filing it away somewhere permanent. "I want to buy you a drink someday, Grace. I want to buy you a lot of drinks." I felt something loosen in my chest that had been tight for 3 years. "I'll hold you to that," I said. "Go get checked out by medical. That's an order from someone who technically doesn't have the authority to give you one anymore." She laughed, shaky and real. "Copy, Nomad. Widow 2 out." The formal debrief happened 2 hours later in a different room, with people I hadn't met yet asking questions about a squadron I'd spent 3 years trying not to think about out loud. I answered what I could. I didn't answer everything. Some of it still isn't mine to give away. Even now, even after a room full of officers had watched me talk a dying jet home over an open channel. Widow 2. Her actual name was Captain Emily Foster. I learned 26 years old, 11 months into her first operational tour. found me afterward in the hallway outside the cell, still in her flight suit, a streak of sweat-darkened hair stuck to her temple. She didn't say anything at first. She just stood there for a second, looking at me the way you look at someone you've decided matters to you before you've fully worked out why. As she stepped forward and hugged me, quick and fierce, the kind of hug that isn't really about politeness. I almost didn't listen to you, she admitted, pulling back. At first, for like 2 seconds, I heard a voice I didn't recognize telling me to do something that felt wrong, and some part of me almost said no. But you didn't, I said. No, she said. I don't know why. Something about how you said it. Like you weren't asking. I didn't tell her that not asking was the only voice I had left after 3 years of nobody listening to the asking kind. Doyle caught me near the parking lot as the sun was starting to drop behind the hangars, throwing long orange light across the flight line. He'd changed out of his uniform jacket, and without it he looked younger, less certain, like the confidence had been sewn into the fabric and not the man. I owe you an apology, he said. A real one, not the one I gave you in front of everyone. You don't owe me anything, I said, and meant it. You didn't know. That's the part one keep getting stuck on, he said. I didn't know, and I decided that meant there was nothing to know. I do that a lot, I think. I've just never had it cost anyone anything before today. I looked at him for a long moment. There was something almost familiar in the admission. Not forgivable, exactly, not yet, but honest, and honesty was worth more to me these days than an apology dressed up nice. Ask next time, I said, before you decide someone's story for them. That's all I'd ask. He nodded slowly, like he was going to actually carry that with him instead of just saying the right words and forgetting them by Monday. Nomad, he said, testing the name one more time, quieter now, almost respectful in a way that didn't need an audience to be real. Is that what I should call you now? Grace is fine, I said. Nomad's retired. Mostly. Colonel Whitfield found me in my car before I could leave, a folder tucked under one arm that I recognized instantly. The particular tan color, the particular weight of paper reserved for records nobody was supposed to see casually. Your file's been sitting flagged for reactivation review for 3 years, he said. Nobody pulled the trigger on it. I don't know why. Bureaucracy, probably. The kind of thing that happens to people who stop making noise. I stopped making noise on purpose, I said. I gathered. He held the folder out, not quite offering it, more just letting me see it existed. There's a training command position opening up. Tactics, emergency procedures, the kind of thing that isn't flying a jet, but isn't sitting in the back of a planning cell in a polo shirt either. I'd like you to think about it. I didn't answer right away. 3 years of being small on purpose doesn't unwind in a single afternoon, no matter how many salutes get thrown your way in a windowless room. I'll think about it, I said, which was true, and more than I'd expected to be able to say that morning. Whitfield nodded, satisfied with that much, and turned to go. Then he stopped, glanced back at me across the darkening parking lot. For what it's worth, he said, Widow 2's alive because you never fully let go of who you were, even when everyone around you decided you weren't anything at all. I got in my car and sat there for a long moment before I turned the key. I drove home the long way that night, past the flight line, past the hangar where Widow 2's F-22 sat under work lights, ground crews already crawling over the damaged engine, diagnosing what I already knew they'd find, a fuel line failure feeding a fire that had nearly cost someone everything, the same failure almost to the letter that had taken 2 people from me a long time ago. I didn't stop the car. I didn't need to see it up close. I'd carried the shape of that failure in my body for years. I didn't need the metal to remind me. My apartment was quiet the way it always was, small and undecorated in the way of someone who'd never quite let herself unpack all the way. I made coffee I didn't drink and sat at the kitchen table with the lights off, listening to the sound of a bass I could still hear faintly in the distance. Engines, always engines, a sound that used to mean home before it became something I kept at arm's length. My phone buzzed. A message from a number I didn't recognize. This is Emily Foster. Widow 2. I got your number from Reed. Hope that's okay. I keep thinking about what you said, that you flew this exact failure. I like to hear the whole story sometime, only if you want to tell it. I stared at the message for a long time before I typed back. Someday, I wrote. Not today. The training command position sat open for 3 weeks before I called Whitfield back. I told myself I was still deciding. I think some part of me had decided the moment he handed me that folder in the parking lot, and the 3 weeks were just me getting used to the idea of being visible again. The first thing that changed was small. I traded the base logo polo for a proper uniform. The fabric unfamiliar and stiff for the first week, the way anything does when you haven't worn it in a long time. The second thing that changed was bigger. People in the hallways started saying my name differently. Not Bennett, the contractor. Just Bennett. Sometimes, from the ones who'd been in that room, quieter, Nomad. Doyle transferred into my first training class, which surprised me until I found out he'd requested it. He didn't say much the first day, just sat in the second row and took notes like everyone else. No smirk, no comment about routes or real missions. At the end of that first session, he stayed behind while the room emptied out. I looked up the 71st, he said. What's declassified, anyway? I understand now why you don't talk about it. Most people stop there, I said, at understanding why I don't talk about it. They don't usually go further than that. I'm not most people, he said. Apparently, I needed a jet almost going down to learn that. But I'm trying. Emily Foster came to see me on a Thursday afternoon, off-duty, out of uniform, carrying 2 coffees like a peace offering she didn't actually need to make. We sat outside the training building on a bench that faced the flight line, watching a pair of jets taxi out for an afternoon sortie, engines building toward that low hum that used to be the only sound I trusted completely. You never told me the whole story, she said. About the 71st. About the 2 people. I turned my coffee cup slowly in my hands, feeling the heat through the cardboard, and for the first time in 3 years, I found I actually wanted to tell someone. Their names were Andrew and Craig, I said. We flew together for 2 years. There was a mission that went wrong in a way that wasn't anyone's fault. Not really a fuel line, a fire, a storm we couldn't outrun. I made it out. They didn't. I've spent every year since then trying to make sure the next version of that mistake doesn't happen to someone else. Emily was quiet for a long moment, watching the jets lift off into a sky going gold at the edges. That's why you talk me down like that, she said. Not procedure. Memory. Both, I said. It's always both. By the time winter came, I'd stopped flinching when someone called me Nomad in the hallway instead of Bennett. The scar under my collarbone still ached in cold weather, the way it always had, but I'd stopped pressing my hand against it like a secret and started just letting it be part of the story instead. A part one got to choose when to tell now, instead of when I hid because I was afraid of who'd laugh. Whitfield stopped me outside the training building one gray afternoon, snow starting to dust the tarmac, and handed me a small case I hadn't asked for and didn't recognize at first. Inside was a patch. My old squadron's patch, retired the same year I'd walked away from flying, reissued now in a limited run for a training program that hadn't existed a year ago, one built around the emergency procedures I'd spent 3 years teaching to anyone willing to listen, whether they knew who I used to be or not. We named it after the technique, Whitfield said. The one you talked Foster through. Command wanted to call it something clinical. I told them to call it what the pilots were already calling it. I looked down at the patch, stitched along the bottom. Small, simple, Nomad's turn. I didn't say anything for a long moment. Some things don't need a response. They just need to be received. I still see Doyle sometimes, teaching his own classes now, a little humbler, a lot more careful about what he assumes when he doesn't know someone's story. I still get texts from Emily Foster, usually short, usually just a photo of sunset over a flight line, no caption needed. I still press my hand to that scar sometimes in cold weather, but it doesn't feel like hiding anymore. It feels like remembering. Nobody in that room that morning knew who I really was. I'm not sure I fully knew either. Not anymore. Not after 3 years of making myself small enough to disappear inside a polo shirt and a folding chair. It took a jet in trouble and a voice that finally couldn't stay quiet to remind me. You've never been on a real mission. That's what he said to me, in a room full of people who thought they already knew my whole story just by looking at me. They were wrong. And by the time that jet touched down safely on the runway, every single one of them knew it. If this story hit you the way it hit me writing it, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me, what would you have done sitting in that back row if nobody was listening to you either? And if you want more stories like this one, hit subscribe. There's always another one waiting.